was with Bill Parcells twice, and someone said to me last night, do not underestimate the connection between Glenn and Parcells and Mike Tannenbaum, who's running the Surge. And Parcells, in his 80s, still a kingmaker, still a king. A lot of owners go down there, kiss the ring, and get some advice from Bill Parcells on how to run their teams. And even though Parcells did not part on the best of terms with Woody Johnson, Mike Tannenbaum didn't either. Rex Ryan didn't either. Rex Ryan's been in the mix. Mike Tannenbaum's helping pull the strings, and the strings may lead, Devin, if all things go according to plan, to Aaron Glenn as the next coach of the Jets.
And Aaron Glenn has a little attitude about him that I think is made for being in New York. And obviously, as I was growing up, I told Aaron Glenn this, seeing him on the sideline, I was a huge Aaron Glenn fan because growing up in New York, the Jets and Giants were always on TV, and Aaron Glenn would always be out there. He had the baggy sleeves as a corner. He was super feisty out there, and I used to love watching the way he played football. And I think when you're in this area and you understand how it works, I think he has enough grit to him that as a head coach overall, it could make a lot of sense for the New York Jets. I think, even when you've heard him on podcasts and stuff and talk about leading men and how to coach them, he has an attitude that I think this Jets team would be well received, that they would love. And he's a defensive guy. And this team is built a little bit on their defense. And they didn't perform well throughout the season this year, especially once we look and see when Robert Saleh got fired, of the impact that had. But I think Aaron Glenn could be that guy that refuels these guys. And he seems like the type of coach that he's going to be honest with you. He's going to hold you accountable every single second of the day that he's with you. And I think that's what they need. And I think now the interesting thing is how fast can the Jets or the Saints hire Aaron Glenn, because then he could make the first move on who he hires as his offensive coordinator. And I always think about what you have there. Like, we look at Kevin O'Connell in Minnesota. He was in LA with the Rams, and he was the offensive coordinator, but Sean McVay called it. And everybody's kind of like, well, he didn't call it. Kevin O'Connell looks pretty damn good as an offensive coordinator and a head coach now. And so you look at who became the next Rams offensive coordinator, Zach Robinson, who's now in Atlanta as their offensive coordinator with Raheem Morris. So I look at Aaron Glenn and I look at, does he go to Detroit? Mark Brunell's the quarterback coach. Like, does he go and try to pluck who Detroit could possibly make their next offensive coordinator and bring that person with him? Because you need, like we just said, Aaron Glenn's a defensive guy. The most important hire will be basically the head coach of the offense. Your offensive coordinator will, for the most part, run everything on offense because you're a defensive guy. You need to run time management and clock management and all that stuff. But that person needs to be the guy on offense. And I think the faster you can hire Aaron Glenn, if you want him, that allows him to kind of make the first move to bring somebody either with him, or if that person ultimately decides to stay in Detroit with Dan Campbell. But I think that would be a key thing to watch, who he ends up hiring as the offensive coordinator.
What a crazy industry it is as an NFL coach. Your connections are to the people you know. Those relationships are far more potent than any team affiliation. And Jerry Seinfeld had this bit years ago about how when we watch games, we're just rooting for the laundry. Saquon Barkley, the primary example of that. You hate him when he's on the other team. You love him when he's on your team. And then when he leaves for another team, you hate him again. For coaches, like, all these teams are interchangeable. They just want a job. Like, okay, where's the job? It's with that team, but I didn't like that team as a kid. Who the hell cares? They're paying me now, right? I hated that team. I love them now. Oh, what about this team? I'll go there. And you're all in it together, rowing the boat in the common direction like they were in Detroit, and then the boat sinks and everybody scatters. And they're trying to take people with them. And now all of a sudden, Dan Campbell, at a time when he thought, as did everyone else, that he'd be getting ready for a conference championship game, now he's scrambling. And, Devin, what's your attitude in a situation like that? If you're Dan Campbell, because I think Dan Campbell's attitude would be, if you want to be here, get the hell out, right? I want you here, but I only want you here if you want to be here. We want volunteers, not hostages. And if you've got Ben Johnson pulling guys one way, Aaron Glenn pulling guys another way. They may have to hire a lot of coaches in Detroit when it's all said and done.
And I think that's the thing. I think the emotional side of usually why you're in these positions as a head coach, you got to check that first. And for me, I would think that would be his initial reaction. Like if guys want to go, F them, let them go. But then you got to take a breath and you got to say, how many coaches do I want to replace in 1 year? And then you got to start to work your magic. You got to bring guys back. I know in New England, that was always a big thing. Like, yes, you can leave, go take a job, but you don't take any of the coaches. And I never understood that because I'm like, I get it. There's a respect factor in that. But like, if you're on a staff and you're going to leave, and you've worked with somebody, if you've been on that staff for 5, 7, 8 years, and you two had to work closely, you've probably talked about the goals and plans that you might want to do if you become a head coach. I'm taking my buddy with me. I'm not like, I understand that it sucks for the current coach, but I'm taking my buddy with me, and that's going to ultimately be his decision. So I think Dan Campbell, he's going to have to do a good job of some of these coaches that might get a chance to elevate. I look at Antoine Randall. He's a receiver coach there. I don't know if Ben Johnson decides to go to Chicago. Now I need an offensive coordinator, somebody I've worked with. Does he take that guy and say, hey, come be my offensive coordinator? It could be open season on Dan Campbell's staff. And I do think he's built something there that people should have confidence in. And I don't think you should probably want to be in a rush to leave out of there. But how you're able to get promoted, and like you just said, the relationship you have with some of the other coaches on staff ultimately could lead to you leaving. And that would be, being in New England, we had that. And it's hard because now you're trying to replace guys and you're trying to do it fast, but also keep your culture. It's really hard to do. And I think Dan Campbell's he's going to look and be in a tough situation, I think, over the next 2 or 3 weeks with trying to keep and retain that staff, but also bring in probably new people to the staff. And now you have to wonder how that'll all work out.
That's one of the consequences of falling short of your goal of getting to the Super Bowl. Not every team is going to wait until February 10th to hire a coach. And some of these jobs might have been filled. Aaron Glenn might not have had a spot by then. Ben Johnson, I think maybe the Bears or someone else would have waited for Ben Johnson. But now it was open season and off they went, and Johnson's already spoken for, and Glenn could be under contract with the Jets as soon as today. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.